I'm Margaret Brennan, and there is breaking news this morning in the war against ISIS, and it's a blockbuster. Just a very short time ago, President Trump announced that the U.S. had conducted a special operations mission that killed the senior leader of the terrorist group, the Islamic State, or ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
Mr. Trump detailed the raid and al-Baghdadi's death in graphic terms.
I got to watch much of it. He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way. He had dragged 3 of his young children with him. They were led to certain death. He reached the end of the tunnel as our dogs chased him down. He ignited his vest, killing himself and the 3 children. His body was mutilated by the blast, but test results gave certain, immediate, and totally positive identification. It was him.
And Vice President Pence is on his way here from an interview across the street. He will be speaking with us, but while we wait, we are lucky to be able to turn now to CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. You were here, David, listening with me to the president describe in longer than 45 minutes in graphic detail this raid. He said he was watching it from the Situation Room happen. What stood out to you?
Well, first place, we should say one of the headlines is no U.S. casualties, except the dog, who he described went into the tunnel after Baghdadi and was injured by the blast when Baghdadi set off his suicide vest. And then the question was, well, if somebody's going to blow themselves up, how do you identify the remains? He said that they had DNA samples with them and were able to make a match within 15 minutes of Baghdadi blowing himself up, and then they collected all the body parts and brought them out with them, along with some unspecified number of prisoners who had surrendered. And he gave some idea of the scope of this operation. He said all told it took about 4.5 hours, an hour and 10 minutes in, 2 hours on the ground, an hour and 10 minutes out.
We don't know where it was launched from.
We don't. We're going to have to do some backtracking to see where you could get from in an hour and 10 minutes. But this was a large force, 8 helicopters. To just put it in perspective, the force that went into bin Laden's compound, 2 helicopters, 25 Navy SEALs. They had some others in reserve. But this sounds like it was a bigger operation, and one which had been in the works for a number of weeks. He said they had somehow found out his travel schedule, but that one of Baghdadi's security procedures is to change his mind about where he's going next at the last minute. But he went to this one place, and the president said they were able to confirm that he was there. Gave the launch, and he said it took off shortly after 5 p.m. yesterday evening.
And the president was narrating it in such detail, it was almost movie-like in his description. But as he described Baghdadi, he talked about the others in the room, including many new members of his national security team. He also did acknowledge Gina Haspel, the CIA director, was key to so much of this. You've learned it was Delta Force commandos who carried this out.
That's what I've been told. Delta
the president
Force
didn't reveal that detail in his remarks.
The Army equivalent of the Navy SEALs. And I would, just from listening to that description, I haven't had anybody tell me this, I would imagine there was a small group of Delta Force that would go into the compound. The compound would be surrounded by a larger group of probably Army Rangers providing security to keep anybody from coming to the compound.
David Martin, you have some busy reporting ahead of you. Thank you very much for joining us. And we do want to take a closer look at Abu Bakr Baghdadi, who he was, why he was such a high-value target. He was not only the leader of ISIS, but he was blamed for inspiring this terrorist movement that really found followers all around the world. Foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more on who he was.
He proclaimed himself the caliph or leader of a so-called Islamic State. But in reality, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was a hate preacher who presided over a death cult of utter barbarity. With a $25 million reward offered by the US, he was rarely captured on camera. This video, released in April, was his first appearance in 5 years, and apparently his last. It's thought he was born in Iraq in 1971. After the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, Baghdadi was detained in a prison camp that became an incubator for jihadis. When he was released, he joined al-Qaeda's offshoot in Iraq, rising to become its leader. He later moved into the chaos of Syria's civil war and split from al-Qaeda. At its peak, ISIS ruled over an estimated 10 million people in Iraq and Syria. The loss of their last strip of territory in March, and now Baghdadi, won't be the end of their ideology.
That's CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams, who now joins us from Istanbul, Turkey this morning. Holly, the president described Baghdadi as the #1 terrorist in the world. Does removing him from the battlefield actually kill ISIS itself?
No, it won't, Margaret. I mean, for ISIS, this is the very significant and symbolic loss of their so-called caliph. And of course, it shows that the US will spare no effort in hunting down the leaders of terrorist organizations. But in the end, ISIS is not about one man. It's the expression of an ideology. It's not the first terrorist group of this type, and it certainly won't be the last. Al-Baghdadi and ISIS did distinguish themselves, if you will, by being particularly bloodthirsty, and also by actually setting up a so-called caliphate, by seizing land and territory, holding onto it for a while, and implementing their version of Islamic law. With other jihadist groups, when they've lost their leaders, we've seen them very quickly replace them, and I think that we will see that happen here. One potential successor is a character named Abu Abdullah Kardash. Like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he's apparently from Iraq and apparently spent time in a prison camp following the US invasion in 2003.
And Holly, he is, as you say, a symbolic loss, but since you spent so much time on the ground inside of Syria, what is the state of ISIS today?
Well, Margaret, you heard President Trump say just then, quote, "We obliterated his caliphate," and that's true in the sense that ISIS lost its last remaining strip of territory back in March. But the Pentagon's own watchdog said in August that ISIS still has between 14 and 18,000 members in Iraq and Syria, and Kurdish forces in eastern Syria are holding, they say, around 12,000 accused ISIS fighters in their prisons. The fear there is a mass escape. We spoke with a US general in Syria just last month, and he described those prisoners as a, quote, contained fighting force. So yes, ISIS has lost all of its territory now in Syria and Iraq, but no, it is not a spent force.
All right, Holly Williams there reporting from Istanbul. Thank you. And joining us now here in studio with more details of the raid is Vice President Mike Pence. Good morning to you, Mr. Vice President.
Morning, Margaret.
You were in the Situation Room watching this as it happened.
I was.
Tell me about the decision behind that. When was it made? Who made it?
Well, first let me just say this is a great day for America. Al-Baghdadi, the most wanted man in the world, is dead. And it's a tribute to the courage of our armed forces, special forces that executed the raid on the compound last night, but it's also a tribute to the decisiveness of President Donald Trump. We first received information early in the week about the possibility of his location.
This was CIA?
It was through our intelligence agencies that the president rightly commended today. Through a combination of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, we believe we knew where he would be. And by Thursday afternoon, the president and I were informed that there was a high probability he would be at the compound in Idlib province. The president immediately directed our commanders to develop military options. Those were presented to the president at the White House on Friday morning, but it was Saturday morning that we received the actionable intelligence that allowed the decision that the president had made to move forward to happen. And it was incredible to be in the Situation Room and to see this unfold in real time as our special forces were on the ground, to see their professionalism over a period of 2 hours. But America and the world are safer today with the leader of ISIS dead.
According to U.S. intelligence, though, ISIS has about 8 branches. It had that battleground. It's lost in Iraq and Syria, but it has, as you know, a significant force in Afghanistan and inspiration all around the world. So what impact will taking out Baghdadi have on the rest of those tentacles?
Well, as the president said today, what the United States of America demonstrated last night is that this president, this country will be unrelenting in our fight against ISIS or any terrorist organization that threatens this country.
But what does that mean for the drawdown of U.S. forces from Syria? Does that mean that Iraq has agreed to now host the majority of the presence being pulled out from Syria?
Well, we have a military presence in Iraq. We have, as the president's made clear, an ongoing military presence in parts of Syria. But to be clear, the president looked at the deployment of American forces in between traditionally Kurdish Syria and the Turkish border, and essentially believed that that was not the right place for our forces to be. American forces went into Syria, worked with our Syrian Kurdish allies to destroy the ISIS caliphate. The last inch of territory of the ISIS caliphate was captured in March. And the president looked at the circumstances where we had American forces essentially providing a safe zone patrol on the Turkish border. That was not the mission.
So
and I have to tell you, as the father of a United States Marine, I couldn't be more grateful that we have a commander-in-chief that is always asking about whether or not American forces have to be in harm's way.
So
and if they're not on the mission, they weren't on the mission. ISIS, the caliphate, had been destroyed. So the president said, we'll bring them home. But last night, the president of the United States proved to the world that our fight against ISIS is unrelenting, and by killing the leader of ISIS, the active operational leader of ISIS, who it was reported just 2 weeks ago was giving orders to ISIS fighters in Syria. We believe we'll have a measurable impact on the effectiveness of that terrorist organization, but we're not going to let up. We're not going to stop the fight. And at the same time, we're going to continue to work with our allies to establish that safe zone between Kurdish Syria and Turkey that the president had myself and Secretary of State Pompeo negotiate in Ankara just a week ago.
But do I understand what you're saying is that the number of U.S. troops remaining in Syria is still being determined? You haven't locked in at a number yet?
Well, we have troops at Tanaf, and then also the president's made it clear that we're going to have forces to secure the oil fields in northern Syria in order to then create a collaborative relationship on that basis
more than 200, roughly.
with our Kurdish Syrian allies. I mean, look, this operation last night, though, was a real testament to the relationships that we forged with Syrian Democratic Forces, who I can't detail but played a role in this in terms of information that we were provided. Turkey's cooperation during the assault last night was acknowledged today by the president. Yes, fully cooperating with the deployment of special forces, but really all the credit goes here to the decisiveness of this commander-in-chief and to the courage and professionalism of the special forces of the United States. We were literally watching, Margaret, in real time as those helicopters set down, as they assaulted the compound, and we heard those words that al-Baghdadi had been killed, and I knew from that moment America was safer as a result.
Mr. Vice President, I also want to ask you while you're here, you have been clear in saying there was no pressure put on Ukraine, no quid pro quo as it pertains to what is now being looked at as grounds for potential impeachment of the president. But we have had at least 4 U.S. officials under oath say that they had knowledge of a deal being offered that made military aid and a meeting with the president contingent on opening an investigation that relates to the company Joe Biden's son served on the board of. Are they all lying?
Well, I can only tell you what I know. And what I know is that the transcript of the president's call with President Zelensky shows that there was no quid pro quo. He did nothing wrong.
But were you aware of that deal that they are giving details of and sworn under oath
all of my
existed?
interactions with President Zelensky, we focused entirely on President Zelensky's agenda to bring about reforms to end corruption in Ukraine and to bring together the European community to provide greater support for Ukraine. President Zelensky said there was no pressure. We had a good meeting when the president had to cancel to stay home for a hurricane, and I met President Zelensky. The aid was released after that meeting, and
but did you have knowledge of the deal that these U.S. officials have described under oath?
What I can tell you is all of my interaction on this issue with the President of the United States and President Zelensky focused entirely on 3 things. Number 1, the United States of America's support for Ukraine following the Russian invasion of Crimea and the war that Russia's been fomenting there. We actually, this administration, different from the last one, have provided lethal weapons for Ukraine,
that
and we've stood
never
with
came
them.
Up in the phone call.
Margaret, we've
These
stood
officials,
with them.
Did you have knowledge of what they're describing,
We stood
or
with
no?
them. We stood with them to restore their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Number 2, President Zelensky was elected in a historic landslide and won parliamentary elections on an agenda to end corruption in Ukraine. And we very much wanted to understand the progress he was making on that. And thirdly, President Trump believed that it was time for the European community to step up. Those are the issues we made clear to President Zelensky and Ukraine. I think as the facts continue to come out, the American people again will see there that in the president's transcript, my interactions, there was no quid pro quo, there was no pressure. It was entirely focused on issues
I
and
haven't
importance
gotten
to
a
the
clear
American
answer
people.
from you on that, though, sir. I do have to leave the interview there. But are you saying you did not ever hear of such a deal? Is that what I understand you're describing?
I'm telling you that all of my interactions with the president, all of my conversations with President Zelensky, were entirely focused on issues of importance to the American people, ending corruption, enlisting more European support, and supporting Ukraine in a way that would restore its territorial integrity and stand by Ukraine for its sovereignty.
All right. Mr. Vice President, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Margaret.
We'll be
Great day for America.
We'll be back in 1 minute with former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice. We are back now with President Obama's former National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador, Susan Rice. She had planned to join us to discuss her new book, Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. We do hope to get to that as well, but it is just such tremendous news this morning. Madam Ambassador, thank you for joining us. You were part of the administration at the moment the U.S. first took military action against ISIS. What is your reaction to the death of al-Baghdadi?
Well, obviously it's a major milestone, and it's one that we all should be welcoming, quite plainly. But it doesn't mean that the fight against ISIS is over, and it doesn't mean that we can declare mission accomplished and just walk away. What we've seen time and time again in this part of the world is that when the pressure is relieved on terrorist organizations, whether al-Qaeda or ISIS, they are able to reconstitute. So we need to be vigilant. We need to maintain a minimal presence in order to ensure that the pressure stays on ISIS and they don't come back roaring.
It is pouring rain out there, right behind you.
I was standing in the pouring rain just a second ago, yes.
Well, I appreciate your bravery through that, coming out on the, we're on the roof of Jones Day here in Washington, bringing you Face the Nation. But back to the issue at hand, do you know, was President Obama informed of the death of al-Baghdadi by the administration. Did you know before the news today?
No, there's no reason why I should know. There is a tradition of common courtesy of presidents informing their predecessors of things of significance like this. Since the White House seemingly didn't feel it necessary to inform the leadership of the intelligence committees on a bipartisan basis, I'm quite confident that they didn't do the normal protocol with respect to predecessors either.
And during the Obama administration, when, say, Osama bin Laden was taken off the battlefield.
As a matter of courtesy.
As a matter of courtesy. Well, you write in your book about the rise of ISIS, and that in 2014, when they took the city of Mosul in Iraq, that it took the intelligence community by surprise. It took policymakers by surprise. There was underestimation of how weak the Iraqi government was, and just that ISIS could use the battlefield the way they did, as effectively as they did. Are you saying you see the risk now with the drawback in Syria, that it appears is still happening, of creating the same kind of vacuum?
We've learned in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now in Syria repeatedly that you can't take the pressure off and expect these groups not to reconstitute. They may come back with a different name and a different leader, but the ideology remains and the ambition remains. And so, yes, I think it's very concerning that President Trump made the decision a couple of weeks ago to withdraw our forces from northern Syria, leave the Kurds exposed, essentially enable the Turks to come in from the north and wipe them out of their traditional homeland, and the Russians to come up from the south and claim territory that had been denied to them by our presence and by that of the Kurds. I think this is still very dangerous. We have ISIS that can come back even with new leadership. We have over 100 ISIS prisoners already that have escaped, according to the Secretary of Defense. And this has been a decision that seemingly was taken without consultation by the president with his closest advisors. And it's been hugely beneficial, not only to ISIS, but also to Russia, Iran, and of course Assad, as well as Turkey.
That's why I was pressing the vice president for some details on those number of forces being left in Syria, because it doesn't seem we have that kind of granular decision-making just
Margaret,
yet.
Just this notion that somehow we're moving a handful of forces out of Syria to be able to send them home. Do the American people understand that since May, President Trump has deployed 14,000 additional U.S. forces to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf at a time when he's saying he wants to take the United States out of the Middle East? This is not on the level.
I want to ask you about something you write about in the book. You know, the public may remember in the wake of the attacks in Benghazi that you were the person put forward by the Obama administration to explain what happened, the information
on that first Sunday, yes.
On that first Sunday on shows like this one. And you say, obviously, that had tremendous political blowback for you, professional, but you revealed for the first time some really personal blowback.
Yeah.
Your daughter
I
had to seek medical help because of what happened.
I described in the book how my 9-year-old daughter at the time, after some weeks of this, very public and sustained pillaring of me, started having what can only be described as hallucinations. And of course, her father and I were terrified. She was seeing men coming out of walls at her. We took her to be evaluated. The doctors at Children's Hospital here in Washington were looking at, is this psychosis? Is it a brain tumor? Is it schizophrenia? Is it a vision problem? And they thankfully, after several weeks, were able to rule all of that out and determine that it was a stress reaction to hearing through the television what I was enduring.
Well,
and so I write
those...
that, Margaret, because I want people to understand that these things have real consequences for those who don't sign up for this.
Those personal details in your book that we mentioned, we have to leave it there, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
This past week, the parade of witnesses for Democrats' impeachment investigation continued, picking up momentum with some key testimony from State Department officials.
Ambassador Bill Taylor testified and gave the most sweeping and devastating testimony about President Trump's efforts to shake down the Ukrainian government.
That was Democrat Jamie Raskin. Taylor's testimony was explosive, implicating President Trump as being part of an effort to withhold a meeting and military aid to Ukraine until President Zelensky would announce an investigation into former Vice President Biden's son and his business dealings in Ukraine. President Trump urged Republicans to get tougher and praised Democrats, saying,
"They stick together and they're vicious. They don't have a Mitt Romney in their midst."
We go now to former Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy. He used to lead the main investigative committee in the House of Representatives, and he joins us this morning from Greenville, South Carolina. Good to have you back on Face the Nation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You told me earlier that you had agreed to work for the White House earlier this month as outside counsel for the president on the impeachment proceeding, but you didn't. And that's because, as you describe it, a restriction on former members of Congress in terms of communicating with an intent to influence for about a year after leaving office. So
Yes, ma'am.
when that year ends, will you be joining the White House fight?
I have no idea. I don't represent the president as of today. I don't know what, if anything, will exist in January. It may be over. My sense is the president needs folks that can represent him now before the House, the Senate, and indirectly through television shows and print media. For 1 year, I can't talk to the House or Senate, and my reading of that statute, and it's a restrictive reading, I'll grant you, but my reading is I can't even communicate indirectly on behalf of a person with the intent to persuade. So I could not come on your show and give advice to House Republicans or House Democrats on how they ought to run their investigation if I were working for the president. So I don't even know if I'm going to be alive in January. If Dallas doesn't start playing better, I won't be alive in January. So I don't know who I'll be representing.
Well, it surprised a lot of people to hear you'd be thinking of coming back to Washington. You used to tell us on Face the Nation you were so sick and tired of politics here and you wanted to go back home. And you were going to dive into one of the most divisive, vitriolic arguments that could be had.
Yeah, my wife asked me a lot of those same questions. To me, impeachment is the political death penalty, Margaret. There's a reason our country has never removed anyone from office. So I look at it as a lawyer. What process is someone entitled to if you are seeking to remove him or her from office and assign to them a stigma that will echo through the halls of history? How much process is due?
Well, you're talking about process there, and that's very specific here in terms of some of the criticisms from Republicans of this Democrat-led investigation. You said to me on this program in April in 2018 the following.
Well, our private hearing was much more constructive than the public hearing. I mean, public hearings are a circus, Margaret. I mean, that's why I don't like to do them. I don't do many of them. I mean, it's a freak show.
Do you still believe that?
100%.
So these hearings these depositions should remain private.
Well, you can't pick and choose which aspects of due process you're going to use. It's not just the privacy. I mean, the reason we respect executive branch investigations isn't because they're behind closed doors. It's because there are no leaks. I mean, John Durham, you have no idea what John Durham has been doing. You have no idea what Michael Horowitz is going to say in his FISA report. There were no leaks with Bob Mueller. You contrast that with the fact that Adam Schiff has had more press conferences this weekend than those three men have had in their lives. He uses an opening statement to give a parody. He lies about a whistleblower. So, yes, I prefer executive branch investigations because they're fact-centric, because you wait until the end to draw conclusions, and because there are no leaks. So I do understand the Republican frustration with the current investigation. My bias has always been towards investigations that wait until the end before they share their conclusions. It's just not fair to do it on an hour-by-hour basis. One other point, Margaret, there's a reason in courtrooms the judge tells the jury, you can't even begin to make up your mind until the last witness has testified and the last piece of evidence has been introduced. I mean, well, if it's good enough for the justice system, why should it not also be good enough for the political system?
So in other words, the storming of the classified area by some Republicans was a bit of a political stunt, and you think that what is being revealed behind closed doors should be heard out before judgments are made on whether or not the president should be impeached?
I think two things. I'm a rule follower. I threw a Republican out of a hearing because he was not a member of the committee. I didn't take pictures on the House floor, even though I was in the minority. I'm a rule follower. So I think if you're going to have private investigations with unlimited time for questioning and cross-examining witnesses, that's a good thing. What's not a good thing is to have selective leaks where you pick
one sentence out of an 8-hour deposition, run to a bank of microphones, and try to prejudice the outcome of an investigation. Again, Horowitz doesn't do it, Durham doesn't do it, Mueller didn't do it. All three of those investigations we have respect for.
You're talking about Justice Department investigations versus the political process of impeachment.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
But when it comes to the political process here with impeachment and those depositions behind closed doors, and about 47 Republicans are permitted to be in there for those depositions alongside Democrats, who are the majority, of course. We heard something this week that was viewed as pretty significant from Bill Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine. He was about the fourth U.S. official to substantiate in his detail, he said, from notes that President Trump's aid to Ukraine and his conversation with the president, all of this was predicated on the investigations of Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company Hunter Biden served on the board of, and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. Those are two quotes. Does that sound appropriate to you?
Well, let's take them separately. Is it an impeachable offense to condition aid on cooperating with the 2016 election investigation? I mean, are we going to remove a president from office if he conditioned aid on figuring out who tried to interfere in our 2016 election?
Well, Congress gets to decide what an impeachable offense is, but conditioning sounds a lot like quid pro quo.
Well, that means something for something. I need to know what both of those somethings is. If the something is we're not going to give you aid until you help us figure out who tried to interfere with the levers of democracy in 2016, Margaret, I can tell you if a Democrat did that, we'd be adding something to Mount Rushmore. I mean, we spent 2 years as a country trying to figure out who tried to interfere with our election. So clearly, it can't be an impeachable offense. It can't be an impeachable offense to ask for the server because Jim Comey wanted the server. So I need to know what's the something.
To be clear, on the server, you're talking about the Democratic National Committee's computer server. Are you saying it's hidden in Ukraine?
I have no idea. I have no clue.
That the president has said that, so it's a theory that's been debunked.
Well, this is the theory that has not been debunked. Jim Comey wanted the server. I don't think it's an impeachable offense for Bill Barr to also want the server. I don't have any idea where it is, but I don't think it's an impeachable offense to say, if you know where it is, would you mind telling us? Keep in mind, that is the server the Russians hacked to gain access to emails. There was a point in time when we all wanted to know about that. So what is the statute of limitations on interfering with our 2016 election? I don't know. As for the rest of Taylor, I've read his opening statement, Margaret, but I would need to follow up with questions. I'd need to also watch what other members ask and significantly what the cross-examination would have looked like before I can draw any conclusions.
All right, Trey Gowdy, thank you for your time today.
Yes,
we will be right back on this busy day with Senator Amy Klobuchar. We're now joined by Minnesota Senator and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on, Margaret.
Thanks for braving the rain today. I want to ask you, of course, about the news of the day, the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Well, this was the takedown of a very, very dangerous terrorist. And so we have to take this moment to thank those that put themselves in danger. The decision was a good one. And this is a guy that was responsible for the deaths of so many Americans, so many innocent people. But as Susan Rice just said a few minutes ago, this doesn't mean that ISIS isn't still there. We still have, of course, over 100 of the ISIS fighters that the Defense Secretary has said got out recently of their confinement. And then we have others that are in a prison, and it's unclear who's going to be guarding that prison. So there are problems, not just in Syria, but all over the world. And that's what concerns me overall about this president's decision-making and about what he has done in terms of breaking down our alliances, leaving the Kurds, who gave us intelligence for this operation, leaving them for slaughter.
You rightly thank the U.S. military and intelligence for this. But President Trump signed off on this raid.
Well, he did.
And this is a political win for him.
Yes.
You're trying to run against him to become the next commander-in-chief. Isn't this going to make it harder to run against him when he can say, he's the guy who got Baghdadi.
Look, I have in the past, for instance, when the president made the decision to respond to Assad's use of sarin gas, I commended him for that decision. But just because you make some decisions, and you must as a commander-in-chief, and you must make those decisions for the security of this country, doesn't mean that his foreign policy overall has not been a disaster. The decision to get out of the Iranian agreement, the nuclear agreement, which has allowed Iran to now bust the caps to enrich uranium, the decision to get out of the Russian nuclear weapons agreement, the decision to get out of the climate change agreement at a time when our world is warming, sea levels are rising, and we're seeing floods and fires all over the world. So those were very bad decisions.
So unlike other Democratic candidates, would you pledge to keep a U.S. military presence in Syria?
I would not have removed those 150 troops. I would not have done it. I would not have given in to Erdogan when he called. Yeah, I would have kept them there. So, and I would have, this would never have happened. But now this damage has been done. So the question is, what do you do now? Well, you keep trying to use your leverage to do everything to defeat ISIS, and you try to do all you can for humanitarian aid, and you certainly try to use the leverage that we have remaining to help the Kurds.
You sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, meaning you have some oversight there of the Justice Department. Do you think those ISIS leaders who are responsible for the deaths of Americans all should be extradited for prosecution here to the United States?
Yes, I think that we should go after those leaders. But the point of this is not really exactly what we're going to do now. The question is, what do we do going forward when the American people have a decision to make? Do they want to keep a president in that has been so divisive in this moment, where this morning we are unified behind getting rid of terrorists, that's for sure. But every morning, probably tomorrow and the next day, he wakes up and he starts going after immigrants, going after people of color, dividing people, and then not having people's back when it comes to bringing down pharmaceutical prices or doing something about infrastructure or doing something to help our farmers who his trade war has left devastated in so many parts of the country. So I think the American people can come together and say, yes, we want to defeat a terrorist.
Right.
But then they look at what he does every single day to this country, and they want new leadership.
You have criticized some of your fellow Democrats also running for the nomination for overpromising in terms of providing free services like free college education and the like. But you are now offering two-year college and technical schools. How are you going to pay for that, and who gets hit with the tax, if there is one?
So I have always supported that. Those are the fastest rising degrees right now in terms of the number of jobs. We're going to have 74,000 openings for electricians, nearly that many for plumbers, for medical tech people, for home care workers.
But what is the
cost
cost
That is where
to
this
that?
is. The cost of this, my education plan costs approximately $500 billion, and I would pay for it by taking the capital gains rate, which has been a ripoff for average Americans, and changing that to the personal income rate. I have shown everything, Margaret, how I'm going to pay for it, because I think we've got a president that has added up debt, trillions of dollars, hasn't shown. I want to make college more affordable, double the Pell Grants, and do this in a smart way instead of paying for rich kids to go to college, which is sadly what my opponent's plans do.
So if you make about $400,000 a year or so, your taxes are going to go up. Is that correct?
For people under my plan, yes.
Okay. Quickly on impeachment, you believe that the whistleblower should testify. Is that correct?
I think it would be good to have the whistleblower testify. I don't know that it is necessary to have the whistleblower testify, because we have people like Ambassador Taylor that have come forward with firsthand knowledge. The whistleblower was simply reporting on something that he had heard from others. I think what's most important is to keep getting the testimony of people that were actually there on the scene. That Ambassador Taylor testimony was devastating. It showed that this was not just a one phone call, that this had been a plan for a long time for the president to put the interests of America behind his own personal interests to get dirt on an opponent. It's a pattern. He does it for his business. He does it for his partisan interest. He does it every single day.
Senator, I know we have to leave it there, but I want to thank you for braving the weather, but also I know you had to be somewhere for a campaign event and you stayed around to talk to us.
Well, this is an important day.
On this important day. Thank you. And we will be right back in a moment. For more now on the impact of al-Baghdadi's death on the war on terror, we are joined now by retired Navy Admiral Sandy Winnefeld. He's a former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a CBS News military and homeland security analyst. Also with us is former acting director of the CIA and CBS News senior national security contributor Michael Morell. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Welcome.
It was extraordinary to hear the president for about 45 minutes share in detail, blow by blow almost, what this raid looked like. Mike, I want to know from you what stood out, and is it dangerous to have so much revealed?
So I'll let Sandy answer the operational military question. But to me, right, this is a great day. We should be really thankful that Baghdadi is gone. And clearly the intelligence community and the U.S. military did an amazing job, and the president made exactly the right decision.
And the president thanked Gina Haspel, the CIA director.
And I think we'll learn more in the days ahead about what the intelligence was and how we got it, and we'll thank even more people. Bothered me a little bit some of what the president did in providing detail about taking back to the United States pieces of Baghdadi's body. It bothered me a little bit hearing the president talk about some of that Syrian oil being ours, right? Because that's what inspires some extremists. You know, the oil comments, Margaret, really validate, at least it sounds to people like it validates 40 to 50 years of conspiracy theories about what American foreign policy is all about, right? And it's not. So a great, great day, but I think the president could have handled the press conference a little bit better.
And Margaret, we do these operations all the time. The difference this one is, of course, the prominence of the target. And you're always worried about operational security. We rarely have a problem before the raid from people working in the White House or elsewhere because they know what the stakes are. They don't want anybody to get hurt. But after the raid, there's usually a race to the microphone because people want others to know that they had a hand in it and that sort of thing.
The Obama administration was harshly criticized for oversharing after the death of
And so you want to be very careful with that. And there are operational details that we protect, sensitive techniques and that sort of thing. Notwithstanding what Michael just said, I think from the operational side, I didn't really see anything that the president said that was of concern to me. There was a lot of other things he could have said that might have been problematic.
Well, I want to play a soundbite from some of what he shared when he addressed the nation from the diplomatic room earlier today.
We were in the compound for approximately 2 hours. And after the mission was accomplished, we took highly sensitive material and information from the raid, much having to do with ISIS, origins, future plans, things that we very much want.
Mike, what are you looking for in that trove?
You're first looking for current plots, right? Is there anything that they're plotting today against any Western target or any target in Iraq and Syria that we need to move to defend against? That's the first thing you're looking for. The second thing you're looking for is how is ISIS thinking about where it is today and what are its strategic plans and intentions? It's the second thing you're looking for. And I think the third thing you're looking for, particularly with regard to Baghdadi, is how involved was he in the day-to-day operations?
How involved was he?
So we don't really know.
Okay.
But I would say this, when we went in to get bin Laden, we didn't think he was involved in the day-to-day operations. When we brought all those materials back out of Abbottabad and went through them, we learned he was heavily involved in day-to-day operations. So you really don't know until you get your hands on that material and be able to look at it.
It was notable the Vice President indicated that there was some direct knowledge of events from Baghdadi. That stood out to me.
And Margaret, this is maybe answer a question some of your viewers have, and that is, well, if you know where he is, why don't you just bomb him and kill him? Instead, we put people at risk to go on the ground, first of all, because we'd like to capture them if we can, but also this is a real treasure trove, and it'll tell you not only about what Michael said, but their networks, how they get their finances, how they communicate with each other. It's all very important at both a strategic, operational, and tactical level to get that sensitive site exploitation.
Now, the president said these were U.S. Special Forces. David Martin reported it was led by Delta Force in particular, but the president thanked a number of different countries. He repeatedly thanked Russia. He thanked Turkey for allowing use of its airspace. He also said that there was some Kurdish help as well. Did his detail and who he thanked stand out to you? Was that sort of standard?
Actually, one of the complexities of these operations is that they do involve other countries. For example, if you're going to rescue a hostage and that hostage has somebody with them who's from another country, you want to consult with that country. There are overflight rights, there are basing rights, and a number of other considerations. So I think it was actually appropriate in the wake of the operation for him to thank some of those people. Some of those are characters we don't necessarily like very much. So that was a little concerning, but it was well done, I thought.
The Kurdish thank you stood out to me because it suggested to me that that's perhaps where the intelligence came from.
You had on this program before said you were concerned about losing some of that intelligence that might be getting shared. The president also said in his remarks that he planned or wanted to release some video of those last few moments of Baghdadi's life that he repeatedly characterized, called him a dog, whimpering, crying. He wanted ISIS's followers to see him like that.
Margaret, this is
Would you advise
on.
this?
This is piling on. The one part of the president's remarks that did bother me was this continual piling on of humiliation. A little bit of that is appropriate, but you're sending a signal to some of his followers around the world that could cause them to lash out possibly more harshly in the wake of this.
You don't want a locker room kind of feel to this, right? And that was the one thing we worked really hard on after the bin Laden raid, is don't make those kind of statements because it does inspire other people.
You said specifically body parts stood out to you in terms of how the president described how they were handled. Can you describe or explain what you mean by that in terms of some of
So I think it's
how
all right.
this
I think it's all
will
right to
resonate?
say. I think it's all right to say that we used, DNA matching to figure out that it was him, but to actually talk about body parts and actually bringing them back with us, right, so that we have them here with us, I think is going too far.
And one of the things, Margaret, that this fight is all about is religious freedom. It's about respect for other religions. And if you look back to the bin Laden raid, as much as we detested that man and as much harm as he did to our nation, we treated his body with respect that is due under Islam. And this was a little bit tough.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your analysis. We will be right back. On this historic day, we also want to remember the families of ISIS victims, James Foley, Stephen Sotloff, Peter Kassig, and Caleb Mulder, and the thousands whose names we don't know. From Jones Day Law Firm, Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.